The only way to deal with guilt is to make friends with it. When you try not to feel it, when you try not to feel guilty, you always end up in trouble. So that's how you deal with guilt. Not by pushing it away, not by acting on it, but by actually accepting that it's there, but not listening to its advice.
Hi, I'm Dr. Angie Holzer, and today let's hear about the importance of saying no and how it's related to guilt. And remember, the first two limbs of yoga, yama and niyama, help us to add or eliminate things in our life that will help us heal. So let's start by hearing from Dr. Gabor Maté.
There's also this belief, of course, that if I say no, or if I say no, I feel guilty, right? If I say no, that I'm guilty. We will do anything not to feel guilty. There are two ways to deal with not wanting to feel guilty. One way is never to say no. Then you never have to feel guilty. You're always saying yes, 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 yes. Except you're going to get headache, back spasms, dry mouth, lack of sleep, fatigue, stress, overwhelm, and finally some disease or depression. The other way some people deal with the feeling of guilt is that they just shut down their conscience altogether. So they never feel the guilt because they totally shut it down. We call them sociopaths or politicians, as the case may be, okay? The only way to deal with guilt is to make friends with it. When you try not to feel it, when you try not to feel guilty, you always end up in trouble. So let me tell you a story from the Bible. You've read the Old Testament or you've seen the movie The Ten Commandments. You know how the Jews are slaves in Egypt, right? And then Moses becomes the leader and he sees the burning bush and the voice of God speaks to him and says that it's your task to lead your people out of slavery in Egypt. Again, the story in the Bible says that, if you remember, that just during the time that Moses was going to be born, the Pharaoh's prophets foretell that some Hebrew slave about to be born will challenge the Pharaoh and lead the Jews out of Egypt's slavery. So therefore they decide that all Hebrew firstborn males have to be thrown into the Nile. And so what happens is that Moses' mother complies with that order, throws the kid into the Nile. She puts him into a reed basket, a basket woven of reeds, and puts the kid into the Nile River. And then the story in the Bible says that Moses floats down the Nile and is fished out of the water, pulled out of the water. Who pulls Moses out of the water? The queen, the Pharaoh's daughter. In fact, what Moses means, the word Moses means pulled out of the water. And so Moses is pulled out of the water by the Pharaoh's daughter, so he's actually brought up at the Pharaoh's court. Except to tell you that the Bible also says that Moses was a stutterer. He had a speech impediment. So when it came time for him to speak to the Pharaoh later on, decades later, he didn't do the speaking. It was his brother Aaron that did the speaking for him. There's a legend that's not in the Bible, but an ancient Hebrew legend that explains how Moses becomes a stutterer. The story is that Moses is being brought up by the Pharaoh's daughter at the court like a little prince. And the Pharaoh's soothsayers once more prophesize that this kid is going to challenge the Pharaoh's authority when he grows up. And if that's true, they have to kill him. So they decide to put him to a test. And the test is this, that they put in front of him two sparkling objects. One of them is a glowing ember of coal, and the other is a royal diamond. If Moses chooses the diamond, it means that he's got royal ambition and he has to be killed. So they put these two sparkling objects in front of the little toddler Moses, and he's delighted and his eyes light up and he looks at these two scintillating, sparkling materials, and he starts to reach for the diamond. At which moment, Gabriel, an angel of God standing behind him, grabs his arm and puts it onto the coal, which Moses picks up and, like a toddler will, brings it to his lips and burns his lips, and that's where he develops a speech impediment. Okay? Now the question I have for you now is to decide in your own mind, was that angel Moses' friend or enemy? So he's a friend. So I want you to consider that guilt is that friend. When you're small, you can't help. You have no choice. When you're very small, you have no choice but to go along with your parents' expectations. Because if you don't go along with your parents' expectations, then you might lose the attachment relationship. So there has to be a mechanism in your brain that says, you better not do that. You better not say no. That mechanism is guilt. That guilt helps you to maintain the attachment relationship with your parents, and therefore you survive. It also gives you a speech impediment. You learn, you forget how to say no. But that guilt that kept you in compliance with your parents' expectations when you were very small also saved your life because it maintained the attachment relationship. That guilt is not your enemy. That guilt is your friend. The only problem with it is that it's a stupid friend. It's got no learning capacity. It doesn't know that you've grown up now. It doesn't know that you're no longer in that dependent situation. Your problem is that you don't want to feel it. You don't want to make friends with it. My suggestion is, next time you feel guilt, be happy about it. Say to yourself, oh my God, I said no. I feel guilty. This means hot dog. I must have done something for myself for the first time in my life. Thank God. In other words, rather than pushing guilt away, just embrace it and say, hello, old buddy. Thank you for saving my life as a kid, but you know what? I don't need your advice anymore. I'll listen to it, but I don't have to follow it automatically. I can think about it and make my own decision. So that's how you deal with guilt. Not by pushing it away, not by acting on it, but by actually accepting that it's there, but not listening to its advice. So then the question then is, how do these traits of suppressing emotions, not saying no, taking on responsibility for everybody else, not expressing your own needs, how do they lead to illness? Well, they lead to illness and burnout because physically they affect the body. They affect the body because it's now known that the mind and body can't be separated. So Western medicine, which has got great achievements, obviously in many, many ways, miraculous in some ways, however, still falls into the deep error of separating the mind from the body. So when you, as I said earlier, when you go to the doctor with a rash, nobody's going to ask you about your life. And yet that rash says everything about your childhood and everything about how you live your life right now. When you go to the doctor with inflammation of your joints, they're not going to ask you about your relationships, about your work, about what you take on. Because we separate the mind from the body. Now, interestingly enough, it was right here in Canada that there was a very famous doctor in the late 19th century, early 20th century. His name was Sir William Holzer, and his name is still revered in Canada. He was one of the greatest medical teachers of all times. And he said in 1892 that rheumatoid arthritis was a nervous system condition caused by worry and stress. And at that time, he had no proof. I mean, the science wasn't there yet. He just had his intuition. He also said that if I want to know whether a man will survive tuberculosis, I need to know not what's in his lungs, but what's in his head. He totally got the connection between emotions and the body. Modern medicine totally ignores it. If you look at the traditional medicinal practices of Aboriginal peoples in Canada, of tribal cultures in Africa, shamanic cultures in Latin America, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine of India, the mind and body are seen as one unit. But Western medicine separates them. And this is despite the fact that we now have the science to prove that mind and body can't be separated. So it's not just that Western science doesn't see it. Western science sees it, but Western medicine doesn't accept it. Which is rather tragic, I think. Because we could be helping a lot more people in many, many more ways if we understood what our science is telling us. And what science is telling us is that the emotional centers in the brain are completely connected with the nervous system, the immune system, and the hormonal apparatus. So that whatever happens emotionally will show up in the nervous system, in our immune system, and in our hormones. Now, in a sense, that's totally obvious, because again, if I were to threaten you right now, pulled a gun, or shouted at you really loudly, your system would change in a split second. Physiologically, you'd be different people. Your heart rate would go up, your muscles would tense, you'd be higher cortisol levels, and so on. In other words, just because I shouted, your physically would be different, because your emotions would be triggered. And emotions would trigger changes in your body. So that's obvious. But this happens 24/7. We're just not aware of it. So when you're suppressing yourself emotionally, when you're not being authentic, when you're not expressing yourself the way you need to be, when we take on stuff that doesn't belong to us, then we're actually suppressing ourselves physically because of the unity of all these systems. They can't be separated. How are they connected? They're connected, first of all, because the nervous system wires them together. So the nervous system is like a giant electrical grid that connects all organs and all systems in the body with the brain. So whatever happens, now, a large part of the brain is actually dedicated to attachment. This is through all our lives. You know, in an elderly couple, this is a study that was done not too long ago, amongst elderly couples who've been together for a long time, when one of them is hospitalized, what do you imagine happens to the other one? Somebody say it? They start getting sick. In fact, their chance of dying goes up quite a lot. Why? Because the immune system of the one person is dependent on the relationship with the other. Our mind and body can't be separated, and we can't be separated from an environment. So what happens emotionally shows up physically. So the nervous system wires all our bodies together with the brain. So whatever happens here, and whatever happens here, happens here. That's the first way. The second way is that each of these organs, each of these systems, the hormones, the nervous system, the immune system, puts chemicals into the circulation that go to the brain and are read by the brain. And the brain puts out chemicals that are read by these systems, so that the white cells in your circulation, the immune cells in your circulation, can manufacture every hormone that the brain can manufacture. So that your brain is talking to your immune system 24/7, and immune system is talking to your brain 24/7. That's the second connection. The third connection, which I didn't even know about when I wrote this book 9 years ago, is that the heart has a brain. Did you know that? The heart has a nervous system. Surrounding the heart is a very fine network of nerves. And this network of nerves functions like a brain. It has predictive capacities, especially when something's bad going to happen. So when you say, I knew it in my heart, you did. You knew it in your heart. And the brain here, this nervous system in the heart, is connected to the brain up here. So they're talking to each other. So the heart is talking to the brain. That's the second. That's the third connection. The fourth connection is that the brain puts out electromagnetic radiation. You can measure the brain waves electromagnetically. So does the heart. So when the two are in sync, then you're kind of together. When the two are not in sync, then you're kind of disorganized. That's the fourth connection. The fifth connection is the gut. Now the gut is, we think of it as an organ of digestion, which it is, but it's much more than that. It's much more than that. The gut is also an immune organ that protects you from bacteria and toxins, and it's also a sensory organ. It helps to read the environment. The gut sends many more messages to the brain than the brain sends to the gut. So that when we get gut feelings, it's because our guts are reading the environment They get messages from the brain and they magnify those messages. So the question I asked last night, and I'll ask you again right now, this is a show of hands I'm going to ask for, okay? If you've had the following experience of having a powerful gut feeling about something and ignoring it and feeling sorry afterwards, please put your hand up. Okay? The majority, right? If you've had the opposite experience of having a strong gut feeling, ignoring it, and being grateful afterwards, now put your hand up. 1, 2, 3. Okay? So you see what the odds are. There's 60 people in the room here, roughly. So out of 60, 3 will have the experience of being glad they ignored their gut feelings, and close to 60 will be sorry that they ignored their gut feelings. In other words, the gut feelings have a chance of being right about 19 out of 20. So in any battle between the intellect and the gut's going to be right 95% of the time. In fact, I want to say that it's going to be right 100% of the time, and I'm going to say that the things that you thought were gut feelings were not gut feelings at all. They were just very strong emotions. What's that?
I thought France was going to beat Italy in the World Cup. So.
You thought France was going to beat Italy. That wasn't a gut feeling, that was just a misbelief.
There's one major source of illness, and I'm talking about any kind of illness, whether that's so-called mental illness or physical illness, and that's childhood trauma. And this is true whether I'm talking about anxiety, depression, ADHD, addiction, psychosis, bipolar illness, or if I'm talking about multiple sclerosis, cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, colitis, Crohn's disease, ALS, scleroderma, and as I said, malignancy as well. Now that seems like a very bold statement, but today I'll be concentrating on the physical side of it. When I say physical side, I'm talking about the illnesses that are not considered to be mental illnesses. I'll be saying to you that just about everything, not everything, but just about everything that we call illness is rooted in compensations and adaptations that have to do with childhood trauma. And I'll quote you something to that effect, just to prove that I'm not totally crazy. Or, if I am crazy, I'm not alone in my craziness. This is from the journal Pediatrics, which is the official journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the article appeared in their journal 6 years ago now, in February of 2012. And the article is from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child. And here's what they say in their abstract. Growing scientific evidence demonstrates that social and physical environments that threaten human development because of scarcity, stress, or instability can lead to short-term physiologic and psychological adjustments that are necessary for immediate survival and adaptation, but which may come at a significant cost to long-term outcomes in learning, behavior, health, and longevity. In other words, what they're saying is that the adaptations that children are forced to resort to in response to early stress help them endure that early duress and difficulty, but those same adaptations become source of pathology later on and even threaten longevity. Now that article came out just 6 years ago, but that's the perspective that I came to adopt or understand a long time ago in medical practice. Now, in order to understand the basis of that, we have to consider how we look at human beings, and how we look at disease. Now, Western medicine looks at disease from a particular perspective. And you have to understand something about medicine. It's science, all right, but it's also ideology. And there's a difference between science and ideology. There's a lot of science in it, and it's great science. But there's also ideology. And ideology is a point of view. It's the Germans say, it's a Weltanschauung. It's a worldview that you're not conscious of. That you have hidden beliefs that you don't question.
So as you learn more about the things that you deal with, it will be easier to find ways to heal, especially through yoga.